Silas Drummond heard the child before he saw her. A barefoot girl, 7 years old, running through the July dust like something hunted. She collapsed against his gatepost chest, heaving blood on her feet, and looked up at the biggest man she had ever seen. Her voice cracked, but never broke. "They want to hurt my mama. She's sick. Please, mister. She can't get up no more." Silas had not spoken to another soul in 14 months. Tonight, that silence would cost him everything he had. Friends, if this story moves you, hit subscribe and follow it to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The sun was still mean when Emmy Whitfield started running. She had counted the steps once before on a day when her father was not home and her mother let her walk to the creek. 4,200 steps from the back porch of Josiah Whitfield's house to the fence line of the Drummond Ranch. She had counted them the way she counted everything: careful, quiet, like if she kept the numbers straight, the world might hold together. Today she did not count. Today she ran. Her feet were bare. Her shoes sat by the kitchen door where her father had thrown them 3 days ago when she'd tracked mud inside. He had grabbed her by the collar and shaken her until her teeth rattled, and her mother had stepped between them, and that was when the hitting started again. Not Emmy, never Emmy, not yet. Always her mother, always Clara. Emmy knew the pattern. She had lived inside it her whole life, the way a fish lives inside water, not understanding it, just breathing it. Father's voice would get quiet first. That was the worst part. People thought loud was dangerous. Emmy knew better. Quiet was when he was deciding. Then the grab, then the shove. Then the sound that Emmy could not unhear, no matter how hard she pressed her palms against her ears, the thick, wet noise of a fist meeting skin that had already been hit too many times. This morning was different. This morning her mother did not get up. Clara Whitfield lay on the kitchen floor, one arm bent wrong. Her lip split so deep the blood ran down her chin and pooled in the hollow of her throat. Her left eye was swollen shut. She breathed in short, shallow pulls like a bird with a broken wing. Josiah stood over her, flexing his hand. He did not look angry. That was the thing about Josiah that the town never understood. He never looked angry. He looked inconvenienced, like Clara had spilled coffee on his ledger. "Get up," he said. "You're making a mess." Clara tried. Her right arm pushed against the floor, her body shaking, but the left arm would not hold. She crumpled back down with a sound that was not a scream and not a cry, something smaller, something that had given up on being heard. Emmy watched from the hallway. She had her hand over her mouth. She was counting her father's breaths. 12, 13, 14. On 14, he usually walked away. He walked away on 15. He took his hat from the hook, checked his reflection in the small mirror by the door, straightening his collar, smoothing his hair, and left without another word. The front door clicked shut, gentle as a church latch. Emmy waited until his bootsteps faded. Then she ran to her mother. "Mama." Clara's good eye found her. Baby, I'm all right." "You ain't all right." "I just need a minute." "Mama, your arm's wrong." Clara looked down at her left arm, and something passed across her face. Not pain, she was past pain, but a cold recognition. She had felt this before 2 winters ago, when Josiah had twisted her wrist so hard the bone cracked. That time she had wrapped it herself with a dish towel and told the neighbor she had fallen off the porch. Nobody asked twice, but this was worse. This was the arm and the ribs and the eye and the lip and something deep inside her chest that hurt when she breathed something she could not name but could feel spreading like ink in water. "Emmy," Clara whispered, "listen to me." "Yes, ma'am." "You remember the big ranch, past the creek, past the dead cottonwood? The giant man's place. Silas Drummond." "Yes." "Mama, I can't." "You can." Clara's voice found an edge it rarely carried sharp enough to cut through the fear in her daughter's eyes. "You run there, and you tell him your mama needs help. You tell him she's hurt and she can't get up. But Daddy said we ain't supposed to talk to. Your daddy ain't here. Clara reached out with her good hand and gripped Emmy's wrist. The child felt the tremble in her mother's fingers, the desperation that Clara would never let reach her voice. Baby, I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Emmy stared at her mother on the kitchen floor. She counted the bruises she could see. 7. She counted the ones she knew were hiding under the dress. She stopped counting. Yes, ma'am. Go out the back. Don't take the road. Go through the tall grass, follow the creek, and when you see the fence you climb it and you find him. Don't stop for nothing. Emmy nodded. She stood, her small body shaking, and walked to the back door. She turned once. Mama, what if he won't help? Clara closed her good eye. Then you come back to me, and we'll figure something else. But there was nothing else, and they both knew it. Emmy ran. The July heat was a living thing. It wrapped around her, pressed against her chest, stole the spit from her mouth. The tall grass along the creek cut at her bare legs thin red lines that she did not feel because there was no room in her body for small pain. All the room was taken up by big fear. She ran past the dead cottonwood, its white branches reaching up like bones. She ran past the place where the creek bent sharp, and the water was supposed to be deep, but was barely a trickle this summer because the drought had swallowed everything. She ran until her lungs burned, and her feet bled from the rocks and the dry earth, and still she did not stop. 4,200 steps. She had counted them once. Today they felt like 40,000. The fence came into view, first solid posts, tight wire, the kind of fence built by a man who did things right or did not do them at all. Behind it the ranch spread out under the sun, a cabin to the left, a barn to the right, and between them a man so tall he made the fence posts look short. Silas Drummond was shoeing a horse. He had the animal's hoof cradled in his lap, a hammer in one hand, nails pinched between his lips. His shirt was dark with sweat, his arms thick as fence posts themselves, and when he heard the sound of a child's ragged breathing, he looked up with the slow turn of a man who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. Emmy hit the fence and grabbed the post, her chest heaving so hard she could not speak for a full 10 seconds. She hung there, a tiny thing against the wood, blood on her feet, dust in her hair and eyes that held more fear than any child's eyes should ever hold. Silas set the horse's hoof down. He pulled the nails from his lips. He did not move toward her because he understood, in the way that a man who has known grief understands that a frightened creature needs space before it needs comfort. Easy, he said. His voice was low, the kind of low that you felt in your chest before you heard it in your ears. Emmy gulped air. Once. Twice. They want to hurt my mama, she said. She's sick. She can't get up no more. Please, mister. Please. Silas looked at the child. He looked at the blood on her feet, the cuts on her legs, the way her thin dress stuck to her body with sweat. He looked at her hands gripping the fence post so hard her knuckles were white, as though she was afraid that if she let go, she might fly apart. He had not spoken to another person in 14 months. Not since the last time he went to town for supplies, and Hank at the feed store had tried to make conversation, and Silas had answered with a nod, and $2 in silence. It was not that he hated people. It was that people reminded him of Eleanor, and Eleanor reminded him of the 11 days, and the 11 days reminded him that love was just another word for something you could lose. But this child was not asking for conversation. She was asking for help. And somewhere in the part of him that he had boarded up and nailed shut, a door swung open. "Who hurt your mama?" he asked. "My daddy." The two words sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Where is she?" "On the kitchen floor. She can't move her arm. There's blood." Silas was already walking. He grabbed a canteen from the porch rail, a blanket from the hook inside the door, and moved toward the barn where his horse stood, half-shoed and confused. "What's your name?" he asked over his shoulder. "Emmy. Emmy Whitfield." Whitfield. He knew that name. Josiah Whitfield, who ran the general store, who sat in the front pew every Sunday, who smiled with every tooth and never with his eyes. Silas had seen him once with Clara outside the store, his hand on the back of her neck, not gripping, just resting there the way a man rests his hand on something he owns. Silas had looked away that day, like everyone did. He saddled the horse in under 2 minutes, a thing that should take 5, but didn't, when your hands were the size of dinner plates, and your blood was running hot for the first time in over a year. He looked down at Emmy. "Can you ride?" She shook her head. He reached down and lifted her with one arm, setting her on the saddle in front of him, like she weighed no more than a feed sack. She stiffened at first, the reflex of a child who had learned that large hands meant pain. But his grip was steady, not tight, and after a moment she let herself lean back against his chest. "Hold the horn," he said. "Don't let go." She grabbed the saddle horn with both hands. He kicked the horse into a run. They covered the distance in less than 10 minutes. The Whitfield house sat at the edge of town, a neat little place with a painted fence and a porch swept clean, the kind of house that looked respectable from the road and told you nothing about what happened inside. Silas swung down and lifted Emmy to the ground. "Show me." She led him around back through the kitchen door that still stood open. The heat inside was suffocating. The stove had been lit that morning, and no one had put it out, so the room was an oven. Within an oven, the air thick enough to chew. Clara lay where Emmy had left her. She had not moved. Her breathing was worse now, a wet rattle that Silas recognized from the cattle drives, the sound of something broken inside. He knelt beside her, and the floor groaned under his weight. Clara's good eye opened. She saw a stranger, a giant stranger filling her kitchen with his shadow, and she flinched. "Easy, ma'am," he said. The same word he had used for her daughter because it was the only gentle word he could find in a vocabulary he had not used in 14 months. "Your girl came for me. I'm here to help." Clara's lip trembled. "You can't be here. If Josiah comes back—" "Where is he now?" "The store. He always goes to the store after." After. The word hung in the hot air, carrying everything it did not say. Silas slid his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, careful of the arm that bent wrong. Clara cried out a small sharp sound she tried to bite back, and he whispered, "I know. I'm sorry. Hold on." He lifted her. She weighed nothing. Or maybe grief weighed nothing, and that was all she was made of now. Emmy walked ahead holding the back door open, her face tight with a determination that no 7-year-old should need. Silas carried Clara out into the sunlight, and for a moment the heat struck them both like a wall, and Clara turned her face into his chest to hide from it, or maybe to hide from the world that would see her like this, broken, bleeding in the arms of a man who was not her husband. He set her on the horse, climbed up behind her, pulled Emmy into his lap, and rode. The town was behind them. The road was empty. The sun beat down without mercy, and the dust rose in clouds around the horse's hooves, and Silas Drummond held 2 strangers against his body, and felt the wall inside his chest crack just a little, just enough to let something in that he had sworn he would never let in again. Behind them, the Whitfield house sat quiet and clean, its painted fence gleaming in the sun. Inside, blood dried on the kitchen floor. And in town, Josiah Whitfield counted his inventory and smiled at a customer, and did not yet know that his wife was gone. But he would know soon. And when he did, Copper Bluff would learn what kind of man Josiah truly was, and what kind of man Silas Drummond had been all along. At the ranch, Silas brought them inside. The cabin was a bachelor's place, 1 room, 1 bed, a stone hearth, a table with 1 chair, everything built for one. He laid Clara on the bed, the only soft surface in the house, and she protested weakly. "I can't take your bed, Mr. Drummond." "It ain't up for discussion, ma'am." She looked at him, then truly looked past the size and the silence and the hard jaw. She saw the dust on his shirt, the calluses on his hands, the way he stood just far enough away so she would not feel crowded. And she saw in his eyes something she had not seen in a man's eyes in a very long time. Not pity, not want, just steadiness, like the ground after a long earthquake. "Emmy," Clara called softly. The girl appeared at the bedside, instantly climbing up, curling into her mother's good side. "We're safe, baby." "For now," Emmy whispered. Silas heard it. The child's correction precise and honest, the words of someone who had learned that safety was temporary. He turned to the hearth, filled a basin with water from the pump, tore a clean shirt into strips, and brought them to the bedside. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the cut on Clara's lip. She nodded barely. He cleaned the wound with hands so careful they seemed to belong to a different man than the one who had just ridden a horse at full gallop across dry prairie. Clara watched his face while he worked. He did not look at her eyes. He looked only at the wound, as though he understood that meeting her gaze right now would be too much, too intimate, too close to something neither of them was ready for. When he finished, he wrung the cloth, set it aside, and stepped back. "Your arm needs setting," he said. "I can do it, but it'll hurt." "I know what hurting feels like, Mr. Drummond." The words were quiet, but they filled the cabin like thunder. Silas held her gaze for one long beat. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon you do." He set the bone. She bit down on a folded cloth and made no sound. Emmy held her mother's good hand and counted 1, 2, 3 until it was done. Silas splinted the arm with 2 flat pieces of wood and the strips of his shirt, tying them firm, but not tight. Then he walked to the porch and sat down in the one chair that lived there. The chair he had sat in every night for 3 years watching the sunset alone, and he put his head in his hands. Not because he was weak, because he had just held a broken woman in his arms, and the feeling of it, the weight, the warmth, the trust had torn open every sealed door inside him, and the grief poured through like water through a cracked dam. Eleanor. 11 days. The way she had felt in his arms at the end, light as paper already leaving. He breathed in. He breathed out. He put his hands down. He looked at the horizon where the sun was sliding toward the edge of the world, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Inside, Emmy appeared at the door. She did not speak. She just stood there, holding the frame with one hand, watching him the way she watched everything, careful, counting, measuring the distance between danger and safety. Silas turned his head. "You hungry?" he asked. Emmy nodded. "I ain't much of a cook." "That's all right," she said. "Mama ain't either." And for the first time in 14 months, Silas Drummond almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that the muscles in his face remembered how, and that was something. He stood, and the child stepped aside to let him through the door, and he went to the kitchen to make something out of beans and cornmeal and whatever else he could find. And behind him, the cabin held its breath, because it had been empty for so long. And now, there were voices inside it, and footsteps, and the sound of a child's breathing, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest beginning of something that might, if the world allowed it, grow into a home. But the world was not kind in Copper Bluff, Texas in the summer of 1877, and Josiah Whitfield would not let his wife go without a war. 3 days Clara stayed in that bed. 3 days she woke to the smell of burned cornbread and black coffee, to the heavy footsteps of a man who moved through his own cabin like he was afraid of waking ghosts. 3 days she stared at the ceiling beams and listened to her daughter's voice drifting in from the porch, talking to a man who barely talked back, and wondered how long this borrowed peace could last. On the morning of the 4th day, she sat up. It cost her. The ribs screamed. The splinted arm throbbed so deep it made her teeth ache. But she swung her legs over the side of the bed and planted her bare feet on the wood floor and held herself there shaking until the room stopped spinning. Emmy appeared in the doorway instantly. The child had a sense for her mother's movements that bordered on animal. She could hear Clara shift in her sleep from across the room, could feel the change in her breathing, the way dogs felt storms coming. "Mama, you ain't supposed to be up." "I ain't supposed to be a lot of things, baby." Mr. Drummond said you need rest. Mr. Drummond ain't my doctor. He set your arm better than Doc Henley ever did. Clara looked at her daughter, 7 years old and already arguing like a trial lawyer. She would have laughed if laughing didn't make her ribs feel like they were trying to escape her body. Where is he? Clara asked. Barn. He's been in there since before sunup. He talks to the horse. Did you know that he don't talk to people, but he talks to that horse like it's his best friend? Maybe it is. Emmy considered this. That's sad. It is. Clara stood. The floor tilted, then steadied. She held the wall with her good hand and walked to the kitchen. It was a small space, a stove, a basin, a shelf with 4 tins, and a bag of flour that looked like it had been there since the previous president. She found a pot, found water, found oats. One-handed cooking was slow, but she had done it before. After the last time Josiah broke her wrist, she had cooked one-handed for 6 weeks. You learned. You always learned. She was stirring the pot when Silas came through the door. He stopped dead. She could feel his stillness behind her the way you feel a wall solid immediate taking up space. You shouldn't be up, ma'am. If one more person tells me what I shouldn't be doing, I'm walking back to town barefoot. Silence. Then so quiet, she almost missed it. Fair enough. He moved past her to the basin, washing his hands. She noticed he gave her a wide berth, the way you move around a skittish horse, keeping distance not out of fear, but out of respect. She noticed because Josiah had never given her space. Josiah filled every room he entered until there was no air left for anyone else. I made oats, she said. I can see that. Sit down and eat. He looked at her, this woman with one working arm. A face still mottled purple and yellow, standing at his stove, giving him orders in his own kitchen, and something crossed his expression. Not amusement exactly. More like the memory of amusement, the ghost of a feeling his face had forgotten how to make. He sat. She set a bowl in front of him. He ate. She watched him for a moment, then turned away before he could catch her looking. Emmy climbed onto the bench beside Silas, her legs swinging her wooden cow clutched in one hand. She had taken to sitting near him whenever possible, not touching, not talking, just being close, the way a cold thing moves toward heat without deciding to. Mr. Drummond, Emmy said. Do you got a wife? Clara's spoon stopped mid-stir. Emmy. It's a fair question, Mama. Silas set down his spoon. He looked at the child with those dark eyes that carried more weather than the Texas sky. I did, he said. She passed. Oh, Emmy processed this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Was she nice? Nicest person I ever knew. Is that why you're sad all the time? Emmy, that's enough, Clara said sharply. But Silas shook his head. It's all right. He looked at the child, and his voice dropped to that low register that vibrated in your chest. Yeah, that's why. Emmy nodded, satisfied. She went back to her oats, swinging her legs. Under the table, her bare foot bumped against Silas's boot, and she didn't pull it away. Clara turned back to the stove, blinking hard. That afternoon, Silas hitched the wagon for a supply run. He had put it off as long as possible, but the flour was gone, and the coffee was low, and 3 people ate more than one, a mathematics his pantry had not been prepared for. Lock the door, he told Clara. Don't open it for nobody. I know how to lock a door, Mr. Drummond. I know you do. I'm saying it anyway. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that neither named. He put on his hat and left. Copper Bluff was 8 miles of dust and heat. The town sat along a single road, buildings lined up like crooked teeth, the general store, the saloon, the church, the boarding house, the feedlot. Small enough that everyone knew your business. Small enough that your business was everyone's entertainment. Silas tied the wagon outside the feed store. He was inside for less than 2 minutes before he felt the shift. Hank Morrison, who had sold him feed for 10 years without a crossword, weighed his grain with his eyes fixed on the scale not meeting Silas's gaze. Heard you got company out at the ranch, Hank said to the scale. Silas said nothing. Folks are talking, Silas. Folks always talk. This ain't regular talk. Josiah Whitfield was in here yesterday. Said his wife got confused, ran off. Said she's not right in the head. Said he's worried sick. Silas picked up his grain sack. You believe that? Hank finally looked up. His face was the face of a man who wanted to do right but couldn't figure out which direction right was. I don't know what I believe. I know Josiah's been good to this town. I know he extends credit when nobody else will. I know his wife never said a word against him. Beaten women don't tend to talk much, Hank. The words landed hard. Hank's mouth opened, then closed. Silas hoisted the sack onto his shoulder and walked out. The street felt different. It was a Wednesday, and the usual Wednesday traffic moved through the usual Wednesday motions, women carrying baskets, men leaning on posts, children chasing dogs. But the rhythm was off. Conversations paused a beat too long when Silas passed. Eyes lingered a moment past Polite. He loaded the wagon, and that was when he heard the voice. Well, well, the giant himself. Josiah Whitfield stood on the porch of his general store, 20 feet away. He was dressed clean, pressed shirt, combed hair, boots polished. His arms were crossed, and he wore the expression of a man greeting an old friend, easy and warm. And if you didn't know better, you'd believe it. But Silas knew better. He had seen that same smile on a rattlesnake once, right before it struck. Drummond, Josiah said, stepping down from the porch. His voice carried just enough to reach the ears of the people nearby without seeming to shout. A performer's instinct. I've been meaning to come see you. I hear my Clara's been staying at your place. Silas tightened the rope on the grain sack. He did not turn around. I ain't angry. Josiah continued, moving closer. I understand. She gets these spells, gets confused, scared. She's a fragile woman, you know, emotional, always has been. I blame myself for not watching her closer. Silas turned then, slowly. The way a mountain turns when the wind changes, not because the wind is strong, but because the mountain decides to notice it. Josiah stopped walking. For just a flash gone so quick you'd miss it if you blinked. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The recognition of a predator encountering something it cannot predict. But Josiah was good. Lord, he was good. The smile came right back wide and easy. Tell you what, Josiah said loud enough for the street. I'll come by tomorrow, pick her up. No hard feelings. I know you was just being neighborly. Silas looked at him. He took his time. He let the silence stretch until it became a presence of its own, until the people on the street felt it press against their ears. She don't want to be picked up, Silas said. Josiah's smile thinned. She's my wife, Drummond. And those are her bruises, Whitfield. The street went quiet. Not gradually, not politely. All at once, like someone had blown out every candle in a church. A woman on the boardwalk pressed her hand to her mouth. Hank Morrison appeared in the feed store doorway, his face pale. Josiah's jaw worked. The mask slipped for one full second. His eyes went flat, cold, the eyes Clara knew, the eyes Emmy counted breaths against, and then he pulled it back. You don't know what you're talking about. Josiah said, his voice dropping. You don't know a thing about my marriage. I know what a broken arm looks like. I know what a split lip looks like. I know what a 7-year-old looks like when she's run 8 miles barefoot because her mama can't stand up off the kitchen floor. Each sentence hit the air like a hammer on an anvil. People stopped pretending not to listen. Old Mrs. Calloway gripped her parasol with both hands. The baker's wife pulled her daughter behind her skirt. Josiah stepped closer. His voice was a blade wrapped in velvet. Be real careful, Drummond. You're a single man with another man's wife in your house. You think folks won't draw their own conclusions? You think the judge won't see it my way? I think the judge is going to see your wife's arm. Her arm. Josiah laughed short and sharp. She fell. She's clumsy. Ask anyone. I'm asking you, right here, right now, in front of God and every person on this street." Silas took one step forward, just one. But it was enough. His shadow fell over Josiah like a curtain dropping. "Did you hit your wife?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Copper Bluff had ever heard. Josiah stared up at Silas, and for the first time, the math changed. He had always been the biggest man in his own house, the biggest voice in his own store, the biggest name in his own town. But standing in Silas Drummond's shadow, he understood what small was. He chose retreat. Smart retreat, the kind that looks like grace. "This ain't the place for this conversation," Josiah said, smoothing his shirt, squaring his shoulders. He turned to the street with a martyred shake of his head. "I'm a patient man. I just want my family back. That's all any husband wants." He walked back to his store, the door closed. The bell above it rang once cheerful and obscene. Silas stood in the street for a long moment. He felt the eyes. He felt the judgment shifting like sand, some grains falling his way, some falling Josiah's, the whole town recalculating the cost of taking a side. Dottie Pierce appeared beside him. She was a short woman, 60 if she was a day, with silver hair pinned severe, and eyes that could strip paint off a barn door. "You just painted a target on your back, Drummond," she said. "Wasn't trying to paint nothing." "I know. That's what makes it worse. Josiah don't fight fair. Never has. He'll come at you through the law, through the town, through anyone he can buy or bully." "I know. Do you?" She looked up at him. "Because that man in there is already figuring out how to make you the villain. And in a town this small, the villain don't get a trial. He gets a verdict." Silas loaded the last sack onto the wagon. "You got something to say, Dottie, say it straight." "I'm saying Clara Whitfield ain't the first woman in this town who showed up to church with long sleeves in July, and she won't be the last. And if you think standing up for her is going to make you a hero, you don't understand how this town works." "I ain't trying to be a hero." "Then what are you trying to be?" Silas climbed onto the wagon. He gathered the reins. "Awake," he said, and he drove out of town without looking back. But behind him, the town was already splitting. In the saloon, men who owed Josiah credit nodded along to his wounded husband's story. At the boarding house, Dottie Pierce told two women what she had seen of Clara's arm, and one of them cried, and the other said it was none of their business. At the church, Reverend Halstead wrestled with what to say on Sunday, knowing half his congregation wanted to pray for Josiah, and the other half wanted to pray for Clara, and nobody wanted to pray for the truth, because the truth was too ugly for a house of God. And at the general store, Josiah Whitfield sat behind his counter, his smile gone, his ledger open, writing names. Not inventory. Names. Every man who owed him money. Every man who owed him a favor. Every man who would ride where he pointed if the price was right. He wrote Silas Drummond's name at the top of a separate page and circled it twice. Back at the ranch, Clara was waiting on the porch when the wagon appeared on the road. She stood with one hand on the post, Emmy at her hip, and watched Silas approach through the heat shimmer. She read his face the way she had learned to read Josiah's scanning for anger, for blame, for the signs of a storm about to break. She found none, just weariness. And something else underneath, something hard and bright, like a nail driven deep. "You saw him," she said as Silas climbed down. "I did." "He was calm, wasn't he? Polite. Told everyone I was confused." "He did." Clara's hand tightened on the porch post. "That's what he does. That's what he's always done. He hits me in the kitchen and smiles in the street, and the whole town believes the smile because the smile is easier to look at." Silas carried the grain inside and came back. He leaned against the porch rail across from her, giving her space. Always giving her space. "I called him out," Silas said. "In front of the whole street. Asked him straight if he hit you." Clara went still. Her face drained of color, then flushed, then drained again. "You did what?" "I asked him." "I heard you." Her voice shook, not with gratitude, with fear. Do you understand what you've done? He can't be shamed, Silas. He can only be cornered, and a cornered Josiah is the most dangerous thing in this county. It was the first time she had called him by his first name. Neither of them noticed. He was already dangerous, Silas said. Not like this. Before it was private. He could pretend. Now you've taken that away from him in front of the whole town. He'll come for you, not just me, you. Let him come. Stop saying that. Clara's voice cracked. Emmy flinched at the sound pressing closer to her mother. Clara caught herself. Closed her eyes, breathed. When she opened them, they were wet, but steady. You don't know him. You think because you're bigger, because you're stronger, you'll win. But Josiah doesn't fight with his fists, not with men. He fights with paper and promises and the law. He'll take Emmy. He'll drag me to court. He'll tell the judge I'm an unfit mother living in sin with a stranger, and in this state in this year, the judge will listen. Silas was quiet for a long time. The sun was going down, painting everything the color of rust. You got that book? He asked. Clara blinked. What book? Emmy told me. She said you write things down. Every time he hurts you, you write it down. Clara's hand went to her apron pocket, the reflex so automatic it told its own story. The small leather notebook was there, where it always was pressed against her body, like a second heart. I've been keeping it for 2 years, she whispered. Dates, injuries, what he said, what Emmy saw. Then it ain't just his word against yours. Clara stared at him. In 6 years of marriage, no one, not her mother, not the preacher, not the women at church, had ever asked about proof. They had offered prayers. They had offered pity. They had offered the quiet suggestion that maybe if she tried harder, cooked better, spoke softer, things would improve. No one had ever treated her pain as evidence. The law doesn't care about a woman's diary, she said. Judge Hargrove might. You know Hargrove. I know he buried his own daughter last spring. Typhoid took her. She was 19 and married to a man who wouldn't pay for a doctor. Silas looked at Clara, and his voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what he was saying. Hargrove cares. He just needs a reason to act. Clara pulled the notebook from her pocket. She held it in her good hand, this small battered thing that contained 2 years of her life written in pain. She had never shown it to anyone. She had written in it by candlelight while Josiah snored, pressing the pencil so lightly it barely left marks, terrified that he would find it, knowing that if he did, the next entry would be the last. If I show this to the judge, she said slowly, Josiah will know. He'll know I've been documenting. He'll know it was planned. It won't just be a wife leaving her husband. It'll be a wife building a case against him. Yes. He will never forgive that. He doesn't need to forgive it. He needs to answer for it. Emmy tugged her mother's skirt. Clara looked down. The child's face was grave, ancient, 7 years old, and 100 years tired. Mama, Emmy said, I can count for the judge too. I remember the days. I remember all of them. Clara knelt slowly, painfully, until she was eye level with her daughter. She looked into those eyes that had seen too much, counted too much, carried too much. And she made a decision that terrified her more than any blow Josiah had ever landed. All right, she said. All right. She stood notebook in hand and looked at Silas. Tomorrow, she said. I want to see the judge tomorrow. Silas nodded. He did not smile. He did not reassure. He just nodded, and it was enough, because his nod was the same as his word, and his word was the same as stone. That night, after Emmy fell asleep clutching her wooden cow, Clara sat by the low fire. Silas was on the porch as he always was, after dark, sitting in his chair watching the sky do nothing. She brought him coffee. Bad coffee, she had made it one-handed, and it was more water than bean. But she brought it, and he took it, and she sat on the step below him. They did not speak for a long time. The night was hot, the kind of hot that made you feel like the whole world was holding its breath. Somewhere out past the fence line a coyote called. Then another. then silence. Silas? Ma'am? Clara. A pause. Clara. She looked out at the dark prairie. What happens if we lose? We won't. But if we do, if the judge sides with Josiah, if the law sends me back. Silas set the coffee down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his big hands hanging between them. He did not look at her. He looked at the dark. Then I'll be standing on that porch the next time you need to run. And the time after that, and the time after that. Until either the law gets right, or I stop breathing. Clara's throat tightened. She pressed her lips together hard, fighting the thing that wanted to break loose inside her chest. The thing that was half sob and half scream and half something she had no word for, because she had never been allowed to feel it. "You don't owe me this," she whispered. "No, ma'am, I don't." "Then why?" Silas was quiet so long she thought he hadn't heard. But then his voice came low and rough, like something dragged up from deep underground. "Because Eleanor died in my arms, and I couldn't do nothing about it. Couldn't fix it. Couldn't fight it. Just held her and watched her go." His hands tightened between his knees. "I ain't a man who believes in second chances. But you're alive. Your girl's alive. And I can do something about that, so I will." Clara stood. She set her hand on his shoulder light, barely there the first time she had touched him, and felt the muscle beneath her fingers tense, then slowly release. "Thank you," she said. He said nothing, but his hand came up and rested over hers for one breath, 2 breaths, then dropped. She went inside. He stayed on the porch. The coyotes sang their terrible songs to the empty dark. And 8 miles east, Josiah Whitfield stood in the back room of his store lamp, burning door-locked writing letters. One to the judge, requesting his wife's return. One to the deputy in the next county calling in a debt. One to Tom Sutter with instructions and a number. He sealed each envelope with wax, pressing his thumb into the hot seal until it burned. He did not feel the pain. He was too busy imagining what Silas Drummond's ranch would look like in flames. They left for town before the sun cleared the horizon. Clara wore her plainest dress buttoned to the throat, despite the heat already pressing thick against the morning. She had tried to pin her hair with one hand, and failed twice before Emmy climbed onto the bed behind her and did its small fingers working the pins with the careful precision of a child who had learned to be useful early. "Too tight, baby." "Sorry, Mama." "It's fine. Leave it." Silas waited by the wagon. He had put on a clean shirt, the only one without patches, and had run water through his hair and pushed it back. He looked almost civilized if you didn't count the size of him, which nobody ever didn't count. Emmy climbed up first. She sat between them on the bench, her legs not long enough to reach the footboard, the wooden cow tucked inside her dress pocket where its head poked out like a passenger. Clara climbed up slowly, favoring her ribs, refusing Silas's offered hand until the step proved too high and she grabbed it without a word. His fingers closed around hers, steadied her, and let go. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road was empty, just wheel ruts, baked hard as stone and dust that rose behind them in a low cloud. Emmy counted fence posts. Clara held the notebook in her lap, both hands on it, now that the splint allowed a weak grip from the left. "Silas?" "Ma'am." "Clara." "Clara. What if Hargrove isn't in? What if he's out on circuit? What if Josiah got to him first?" "Then we wait. And we come back." "I can't keep coming back. Every day I'm at your ranch is another day Josiah builds his story. Another day, the town decides I'm a fallen woman shacking up with a stranger." Silas kept his eyes on the road. "Let me ask you something." "Go ahead." 2 years you've been writing in that book. Every bruise, every date, every word he said. You didn't do that for nothing. You did it because somewhere inside you knew this day was coming. So the question ain't whether you're ready. You've been ready longer than you know. Clara's fingers tightened on the notebook. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Emmy leaned against her mother's good arm and said nothing, but her hand found Clara's knee and stayed there. Copper Bluff appeared through the heat shimmer, like a mirage that refused to dissolve. Even at this hour, the town was stirring. A dog slept in the middle of the road. 2 boys carried water buckets from the well. Mrs. Calloway swept her porch with the grim determination of a woman waging war on dust she could never defeat. Silas pulled the wagon up outside the courthouse, a word too grand for the building. It described a single-story wood frame with a tin roof and a sign that read, "Justice of the Peace," in letters that had faded to ghosts. He tied the horse and came around to Clara's side. "You sure?" he asked. Clara looked at the building. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the notebook. "I've never been less sure of anything in my life," she said. "Let's go." They walked in together. Emmy held her mother's hand. Silas walked behind, not beside, deliberate, giving Clara the front, making it clear without words whose fight this was. Judge Calvin Hargrove sat behind a desk cluttered with papers, a coffee cup stained brown from years of use, and a Bible so worn its cover had turned soft as cloth. He was 63 years old, thin as a rail, with white hair that had given up on any particular direction, and eyes that had seen enough of humanity to be tired of it, but not yet done with it. He looked up when they entered. His gaze moved from Silas to Clara, to the child, to Clara's splinted arm, to her face, where the bruises had faded to a sickly yellow-green that somehow looked worse than the original purple. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "Judge Hargrove." "Drummond." Silas nodded. Hargrove leaned back in his chair. It creaked like a complaint. "I had a feeling I'd be seeing you. Josiah was here yesterday. Filed a petition for the return of his wife and child. Claims abandonment." He paused. "Claims you're mentally unfit." Clara flinched. Silas saw it, the quick tightening of her jaw, the way her chin dropped a fraction before she caught it and brought it back up. A reflex she had practiced 1,000 times, the flinch, then the correction, then the mask. But today she did not put the mask on all the way. "I'm not unfit," Clara said. "I'm beaten." The word dropped into the room like a stone into a well. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, in attention. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Whitfield." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." Clara stepped forward and set the notebook on his desk. 2 years, every date, every injury, what he did, what he said, what my daughter saw. It's all in there. Hargrove did not touch the notebook immediately. He looked at it the way a man looks at a loaded gun, with respect for what it could do. "You wrote this yourself?" "Every word, by candlelight, while he slept." Hargrove opened the notebook. He read the first page. His face did not change. He turned to the second page, the third, the fourth. He read slowly, his lips pressing thinner, with each entry his hand coming up once to rub his jaw, the way men do when they are trying to hold something down. The room was silent, except for the turning of pages and the sound of Emmy's breathing, quick and shallow, the breathing of a child watching adults decide her future. Hargrove reached a page near the middle and stopped. He read it twice. He looked up at Clara. "June 7th, 1876. Broke 2 ribs left side. Emmy was in the room. She counted the blows. She counted 9. Clara's throat moved. "Yes, sir." "Your daughter counted the blows." "She counts everything. It's how she survives." Hargrove looked at Emmy. The child stood perfectly still, her hand in her mother's, her face carrying an expression that no 7-year-old should know how to carry, the expression of a witness. "Child," Hargrove said, and his voice was gentler than Clara had ever heard a man in authority speak. "Can you tell me what you remember?" Emmy looked at her mother. Clara squeezed her hand. "Tell him the truth, baby, that's all." Emmy turned to the judge. She did not fidget. She did not look away. She spoke the way she counted, precise, steady, without decoration. "He hits Mama when he gets quiet. Not when he yells. Yelling means he's still deciding. Quiet means he's done deciding. He uses his right hand mostly. Sometimes he grabs her neck. She can't breathe when he does that and her face turns red, and I count until he lets go. The longest was 11 seconds. I counted. Hargrove set down the notebook. He removed his spectacles and pressed his fingers against his eyes. When he put the spectacles back on, something had changed in his face. The professional distance was still there, but underneath it, something personal had cracked through. "Drummond," Hargrove said. "Step outside." Silas looked at Clara. She gave a small nod. He left. The door closed. Hargrove stood and came around the desk. He pulled a chair forward and sat in front of Clara, not behind the desk, not above her, across from her. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need to be honest with you. Please." Texas law gives a husband considerable authority over his wife and children. You know that. I do. Josiah's petition is legally sound. He has the right to demand your return. He has the right to claim custody of your daughter. The fact that you're residing with an unmarried man weakens your position considerably. Clara's face tightened, but she held. However, Hargrove tapped the notebook. This changes things. Not because the law says it does. Frankly, the law is silent on the question of a husband's discipline. But because I am not silent. I am the judge in this district, and I have discretion. What does that mean? It means I can delay his petition. I can order a formal inquiry. I can request testimony from witnesses. I can make this slow, Mrs. Whitfield. Slow enough for you to build a case that even the law can't ignore. And Josiah? What happens to Josiah while it's slow? He stays in town. You stay where you are. I issue a temporary order of protection. A piece of paper. Yes, ma'am, a piece of paper, with my name on it and the weight of this court behind it. Clara looked at the notebook on his desk. He'll be furious. I expect he will. He won't stop. No, ma'am. Men like Josiah don't stop. They escalate, which is why I need you to understand what you're walking into. If we do this, it will get worse before it gets better. He will turn this town against you. He will call you names that will make your ears burn. He will use every friend, every debt, every ounce of influence he has to crush you, and you will have to stand there and take it and keep standing. Clara's eyes were bright, but her voice was iron. I've been taking it for 6 years, Judge. The difference is now I get to take it standing up. Hargrove studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, returned to his desk, and began writing. I'll have the order drafted by noon. Drummond can pick it up. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is the easy part. Clara gathered Emmy and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. Judge Hargrove. Ma'am. Your daughter, the one you lost. What was her name? Hargrove's pen stopped. He did not look up for a long time. When he did, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Margaret. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for yours, Mrs. Whitfield. Now go on, and keep that child close. They stepped outside into the morning heat, and Silas was leaning against the wagon with his arms crossed, his hat tipped low, and his whole body angled toward the courthouse door like a compass needle pointing north. Well, he asked. Clara took a breath. He's giving us time. Not much, but some. How much? Enough to make Josiah answer for what he's done, if we do it right. Silas nodded. He reached down and lifted Emmy onto the wagon. The child went up easy, already used to his hands, already trusting the grip that could have crushed her, but never would. They were halfway to the wagon bench when Josiah's voice cut across the street. Clara. Everything stopped. Clara's hand froze on the wagon rail. Emmy went rigid. Silas straightened to his full height, which in the morning light threw a shadow that reached halfway across the road. Josiah walked toward them from the direction of his store. He was not alone. Tom Sutter flanked him on the right. A man Clara didn't recognize walked on the left, thick-necked, heavy-jawed, the kind of man whose size came from meanness rather than labor. Josiah stopped 10 feet away. His face was calm. His voice was warm. That was the terrifying part. "Sweetheart," he said, "I've been worried sick about you." Clara's whole body went tight as a bowstring. Emmy pressed into her mother's hip. Silas took one step forward, putting himself between Clara and the three men, his movement unhurried and absolute. "She ain't your sweetheart," Silas said. "Not anymore." Josiah didn't look at Silas. He looked past him at Clara, his eyes locking onto hers with the intensity of a man who had spent 6 years training her to obey that gaze. "Clara, honey, come on home. We can work this out. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. You know I love you. You know I love Emmy. We're a family." Clara's mouth opened. For one terrible second, Silas saw her waver. 6 years of conditioning pulled at her like a current, the familiar gravity of the man who had owned her, the man whose approval she had spent half a decade trying to earn, the man whose voice still made something inside her flinch and fold. Emmy felt it too. She felt her mother's hand tremble, felt the hesitation, and something inside the child ignited a bright, fierce thing that had no name but burned like a coal. "Mama," Emmy said. Her voice was clear and carried. "Don't." One word, spoken by a 7-year-old who had counted every blow, every breath, every second of silence that meant the hitting was about to start. One word that landed in Clara's chest like a bell struck in an empty church. Clara's spine straightened. Her chin came up. Her eyes met Josiah's, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not flinch. "I filed with the judge," she said. Her voice shook, but it held. "He's seen the book, Josiah. Every page." Josiah's expression cracked. Not the smile was gone. What cracked was the thing underneath the machinery that ran the smile, the calculation, the control. For one raw second, Josiah Whitfield looked exactly like what he was, a man who hit women, and had just learned that the woman hit back. "What book?" he whispered. "You know what book." "There is no book. You're lying. You're confused. You've always been." 2 years, Josiah. Every date, every bruise, every time Emmy counted. It's in the judge's hands now. The street had gathered. Not obviously, people didn't crowd in towns like this. They accumulated, drifting to porches and doorways and window frames, pretending to sweep or hang laundry, while their ears strained toward the voices on the courthouse road. Tom Sutter shifted uncomfortably. The thick-necked stranger looked at Josiah for instruction. Josiah gave none. He was staring at Clara with an expression she had never seen on his face, not anger, not cold calculation, but naked bewilderment. The animal he had trained had turned on him, and he could not comprehend it. "You stupid woman," he said, and his voice lost its music, dropping to the flat, dead tone that Clara knew from the kitchen, from the bedroom, from every room where the doors were closed and the hitting started. "You think a book is going to save you? You think that old man in there is going to protect you? I will bury you, Clara. I will take Emmy, and you will never see her again. I will tell every soul in this county that you are a whore and a liar and an unfit mother, and they will believe me because they have always believed me." "Not anymore," Clara said. Josiah lunged, not at Clara, at the wagon where the notebook sat beside Emmy on the bench. His hand shot out fast, the same hand that had split Clara's lip 3 days ago, reaching for the book that could destroy him. Silas caught his wrist mid-air. One hand, no effort. He held Josiah's arm the way you hold a stick. A dog has fetched, firm, dismissive, without respect. "Don't," Silas said. One word, the only one needed. Josiah tried to pull free. He couldn't. The realization crossed his face like weather, the understanding that for all his cunning, all his manipulation, all his careful cruelty, he was physically powerless against the man in front of him. And that powerlessness burned him worse than any accusation. "Get your hand off me, Drummond." Silas released him. Josiah stumbled back. Tom Sutter caught his arm. The thick-necked stranger took a half-step forward, then met Silas's eyes and took a full step back. "The judge has the order," Silas said, his voice carrying not for Josiah, but for the street. "Temporary protection. You come near her, you come near the child, you answer to the court. And if the court's too slow, you answer to me." Josiah straightened his coat. He smoothed his hair. The mask came back slower than usual, fitting imperfectly, like a lid forced onto the wrong jar. He looked around the street at the faces watching from porches and doorways, and he calculated. "This ain't over," he said quietly. "Not a threat. Quieter than a threat. A promise spoken the way a man speaks when he has already decided what comes next and is simply informing the world." He turned and walked back to his store. Tom Sutter followed. The stranger followed. The door closed. The bell rang. Clara's legs gave out. She didn't fall. Silas was there, his hand on her elbow, holding her upright with a grip so gentle it contradicted everything about his size. Emmy grabbed her mother's waist from the other side, her small arms straining to hold what her strength couldn't. "Get me in the wagon," Clara breathed. "Get me out of here before I break." Silas lifted her up. He lifted Emmy. He climbed aboard and took the reins and drove down the main street of Copper Bluff at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, neither running nor lingering, the pace of a man who would not be chased and would not be shamed. Behind them, Dottie Pierce stood on the boarding house porch. She had watched the whole thing. She turned to Martha Gaines, the baker's wife, who stood beside her with her hand over her mouth. "Well," Dottie said, "now you've seen it." Martha's eyes were red. "I always suspected. I didn't want to." Nobody ever wants to. That's how men like Josiah survive. On the silence of decent people who don't want to get involved. Martha wiped her eyes. "What can we do?" Dottie watched the wagon disappear down the road, the dust cloud hanging behind it like a veil. "We can stop being silent." On the road home, nobody spoke for a full mile. The heat pressed down. The horse walked steady. Emmy sat between her mother and Silas, her hand in Clara's, her shoulder against Silas's arm, holding them both like a bridge between two banks. Then Clara spoke. Her voice was thin, exhausted, wrung out like a rag twisted dry. "I stood up." Silas nodded. "I stood up and I didn't fall." "No, ma'am, you did not." Clara looked at her daughter. Emmy looked back with those old eyes. "How many days, baby?" Clara asked. Emmy understood. She always understood. 5 days, Emmy said. 5 days, safe. Clara pulled her daughter close and pressed her face into Emmy's hair, and held on, and her body shook with the sobs she had swallowed in front of Josiah, in front of the judge, in front of the town. The sobs she would not give any of them, but would give freely here on this road between these two people who had not asked her to be strong, but had simply stood beside her while she chose to be. Silas drove on. His eyes stayed forward. His hand stayed on the reins. But his jaw worked once hard, and he blinked more than the dust required. That night after Emmy slept, Clara found him on the porch. She sat on the step. He sat in the chair. The same positions as before, the same night, heat, the same coyotes singing their ragged songs in the dark. "He'll come," Clara said. "You know that." "I know." "Not alone. He'll bring men. He'll bring weapons. He'll come at night when he thinks we're sleeping." "I know. And the order won't stop him. Paper doesn't stop a man like Josiah. Nothing stops a man like Josiah except a bigger man or a buried man." Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, "There's a third option." "What?" "A broken man. A man the town won't follow anymore. A man whose name means nothing." Clara turned to look at him. "How do you break a man like Josiah?" Silas stared into the dark. His hands rested on his knees, still as stone. The hands that could have crushed Josiah's wrist today, but had only held it. "You take away the only thing he cares about. It ain't you. It ain't Emmy. It's them." He tilted his head toward the dark, toward the town. It's what they think of him. Strip that away, and he's got nothing left but his own ugliness staring back at him. Clara held the notebook against her chest. The book. The book. In open court. In front of every person who ever shook his hand and said what a fine man he was. You read it out loud, and you let them hear what their fine man did behind closed doors. Clara's breath caught. The thought of it standing in a room full of people who had smiled at Josiah and ignored her reading aloud the catalogue of her humiliation made her stomach churn. It was one thing to show the judge in private. It was another to speak those words into the air where they could never be taken back. "I don't know if I can do that," she whispered. "You don't have to decide tonight. But it has to be soon." "It does." Clara closed her eyes. The coyotes sang. The heat pressed. Somewhere in town, Josiah Whitfield was making plans of his own, and the night was not big enough to hold what both sides were building. Silas. Yeah. If something happens to me, if he gets to me before the court date, you take Emmy, you raise her right, you teach her that counting is a gift, not a scar. Silas's hand gripped the arm of the chair so hard the wood groaned. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me. He turned his head. In the dark, she could barely see his face, but she could feel his eyes steady and fierce, and full of something that neither of them was ready to name. I promise. Clara stood. She touched his shoulder again, the same light touch as the night before, and this time his hand came up and held hers, and did not let go for 3 full breaths. Then she went inside. Silas stayed on the porch, staring at the dark, his hand still warm where hers had been. He listened to the coyotes. He listened to the silence between their calls. He listened to the old house settling around 3 sleeping souls instead of 1. And he made his own promise, the one he did not say out loud, the one that lived in his bones and his blood and the set of his jaw. Josiah Whitfield would not touch them again. Not Clara. Not Emmy. Not while Silas Drummond still cast a shadow on this earth. The porch chair creaked as he leaned back. His eyes stayed open. His ears stayed sharp. He would not sleep tonight. Josiah came on the 7th night. Silas had expected it sooner. 5 days of silence from a man like Josiah Whitfield was not patience. It was preparation. And when the sound came hooves on hard-packed earth, 3 sets, maybe 4 moving at a walk that was too deliberate to be casual. Silas was already on his feet, already at the window, already counting. 3 riders, lanterns out, moving by moonlight. He had not slept more than 2 hours any night that week. He had moved the rocking chair from the porch to just inside the door, angled so he could see both windows and hear the road. Clara had watched him do it without comment. She understood what it meant. Emmy had asked why the chair moved, and Clara told her Mr. Drummond liked the breeze from the door. Emmy had looked at her mother with those counting eyes and said nothing, because she was 7, and she knew what a lie sounded like, even a kind one. Now Silas crossed to the bedroom door. He opened it, and Clara was already sitting up. Her good hand pressed flat on the mattress, her eyes wide in the dark. How many? She whispered. 3 I can see. Could be more hanging back. Clara swung her legs off the bed. Emmy stirred beside her, murmured something about counting, and rolled over. Clara pulled the blanket up around her daughter and turned back to Silas. I'm not hiding in the back room this time. Clara. I said I'm not hiding. If he's come for me, he can look me in the eye. Silas read her face. The bruises were almost gone now, just faint shadows that you had to know to see. But the thing that had replaced them was harder than any bruise. It lived in the set of her jaw, in the line of her shoulders, in the way she stood without reaching for the wall. Stay behind me, he said. That's all I ask. I'll stay behind you until I don't need to. He almost argued. He didn't. There wasn't time, and there was something in her voice that told him the argument would cost more than it gained. He went to the door. The rifle stood where it always stood, propped against the wall. He did not pick it up. Instead, he pulled the door open and stepped onto the porch, filling the frame with his body, his hands empty and visible at his sides. The riders had stopped at the fence line. Josiah sat the middle horse. Even in the pale light, Silas could read his posture rigid. Coiled, the posture of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times and was now watching it play out in real time, checking reality against the script. Tom Sutter sat to Josiah's right, slumped and reluctant, a man paying a debt he wished he'd never taken. The third rider was the thick-necked stranger from the street. Silas had learned his name since then. Dale Cheswick, a hired man from the next county, the kind who followed money the way a dog follows meat. "Drummond," Josiah called. His voice was controlled, measured, pitched for an audience, even though the only audience was the dark. "I'm here for my family. I've got papers, signed by the deputy in Millsap County, legal and proper." Silas didn't answer. He let the silence do what silence did best, make the other man fill it. Josiah shifted in his saddle. "You hear me? I said I've got papers. Deputy Connors signed them himself. Writ of recovery for my wife and child. You're harboring them against lawful order. Hargrove's order says different. Hargrove's order ain't worth the paper it's printed on outside this county. Connors outranks him on family matters. I checked. You want to see the documents? I want to see you turn that horse around." Josiah laughed, short, sharp, without joy. "Still playing the hero, Drummond, big silent man protecting the damsel. You think this is one of those stories? This is Texas. This is the law, and the law says she's mine. She ain't property, Whitfield. The hell she ain't. She's my wife. That child is my daughter. And you're a trespasser, an interloper, a single man with another man's family in his bed. How do you think that looks? How do you think the judge will see it when I tell him what's really going on here?" The porch boards creaked behind Silas. Clara stepped out. She moved past Silas before he could stop her, past his arm that reached to hold her back, past the threshold that separated safety from everything else. She stood at the edge of the porch, her splinted arm held against her body, her good hand balled into a fist at her side. The moonlight caught her face, and Josiah saw her clearly, the healing bruises, the straight spine, the eyes that did not look down. "Clara!" Josiah's voice changed, softer, warmer. The voice he used in front of people, the voice that made neighbors say what a good husband, what a patient man. "Sweetheart, come home. We'll work it out. I miss you. I miss Emmy. Whatever happened, we can fix it. You broke my arm, Josiah." The words carried across the still air. Tom Sutter flinched in his saddle. Dale Cheswick looked sideways at Josiah with the expression of a man recalculating his employer. "That was an accident," Josiah said, and his voice was still warm, still smooth, but there was a crack in it now, hairline thin. "You know I'd never. June 7th last year. 2 ribs. Emmy was in the room. She counted 9 hits. She told me the number before I wrote it down. Clara, stop this. March 12th year before that. You choked me against the kitchen wall for 11 seconds. I know because Emmy counted. She always counts, Josiah. She counts because it's the only thing she can control when her father is beating her mother. That's enough." April 23rd. You dragged me by my hair from the bedroom to the porch because your supper was cold. Mrs. Henderson was walking past and you waved at her with the same hand that had my hair in it, and she waved back and kept walking. I said that's enough. Josiah's voice broke. The mask shattered. His face contorted the real face, the kitchen face, the closed-door face that Clara had memorized over 6 years. His horse danced sideways, sensing the change in its rider's body. Tom Sutter pulled his horse back 2 steps. Josiah, maybe we should... Shut up, Tom. Josiah dismounted. He hit the ground hard and came forward, his boots crunching the dry earth, his body leaning into the walk the way he leaned into a punch. Silas stepped down from the porch, placing himself between Josiah and Clara. The ground shook slightly under his weight, or maybe that was just the night holding its breath. Josiah stopped 3 feet from Silas. He had to crane his neck to meet the big man's eyes. The size difference was brutal. Josiah was average height, average build. A man whose power had always come from his mind, and his money, and his willingness to hurt things smaller than him. Standing in front of Silas Drummond, he had none of those advantages. But cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. "You think you can take my wife?" Josiah hissed. "You think you can turn her against me? I built that woman. I gave her a house, a name, a place in this town. Without me, she's nothing. She was nothing when I found her, and she'll be nothing when you're done with her." "That's the first honest thing you've said all night," Silas replied. "Because that's exactly how you see her. A thing you built, a thing you own, a thing you can break when it stops working the way you want." "She is mine." "Not anymore." Josiah's fist came fast, faster than the street, faster than a man his size should have been able to swing. It caught Silas on the jaw, a solid hit, knuckles against bone, the kind that splits skin. Silas's head turned with the blow. He tasted blood. He did not step back. Clara gasped. Emmy appeared in the doorway behind her. The child had woken, had crept to the door, had pressed her face against the frame. Her eyes were huge in the dark, and she was counting. Counting breaths. Counting seconds. Counting the way she always counted when the violence started. Josiah swung again. Silas caught the fist in his palm, closed his fingers around it, and held. Josiah's face twisted. He punched with his left hand. Silas caught that too. He held both of Josiah's fists in his hands, arms out like a man holding open a gate, and he squeezed. Josiah's knees buckled. He gasped. The bones in his hands ground together under Silas's grip, and for the first time in his life, Josiah Whitfield felt what his wife had felt. The helplessness. The pain coming from hands that would not let go. The understanding that the person holding you could do anything they wanted, and you could not stop them. "Feels different, don't it?" Silas said quietly. "Being the one who can't fight back." "Let me go," Josiah choked. "Let me go, you son of a—" "I'll let you go. But first, you're going to listen." Silas leaned down, his face close to Josiah's, his voice so low, only the two of them could hear. "That woman behind me is braver than you will ever be. She survived 6 years of you. She wrote down every blow. She walked into a judge's office with a broken arm and spoke your name out loud. That takes more courage than anything you've ever done in your miserable life." He released Josiah's hands. Josiah staggered back, clutching his fingers, his face white with pain and rage. "And that child in the doorway." Silas continued, straightening to his full height. "She counts. Did you know that every time you hit her mother, she counted the blows? She's 7 years old, and she can tell the judge exactly how many times your fist landed on any given night. Think about that. Your own daughter is your accuser." Josiah's eyes flicked to the doorway. Emmy stood there small and still, and she looked back at her father with an expression that contained no fear. Not anymore. She had used up all her fear in 7 years of counting, and what was left was something harder, something that would outlast every bruise and every broken bone. Josiah saw it, and for the first time something in him faltered. Not conscience. Men like Josiah don't have conscience in the way other people do, but calculation. He was calculating even now, even with throbbing hands and a mouth full of fury, and the calculation told him that the child's testimony, combined with the notebook, combined with the judge's sympathy, was a wall he could not climb over. "Tom," Josiah said, his voice ragged. "Dale." Neither man moved from their horses. Tom Sutter stared at the ground. Dale Cheswick had already turned his horse halfway around, the body language of a man renegotiating his contract. "Tom," Josiah's voice cracked. "I ain't part of this, Josiah." Tom's voice was small, ashamed. The voice of a man who had just heard a 7-year-old describe counting her mother's beatings and could not unhear it. "I came because I owed you money. I don't owe you this. You owe me everything. Your store, your house, your—" "Then take them. Take the store. Take the house. I don't care. I ain't dragging a woman and child out of a man's home in the middle of the night. My mother would rise from her grave and strike me dead." Dale Cheswick spoke for the first time. "I'm going." He turned his horse fully. "Find another man, Whitfield. I don't hire on for this kind of work." He rode into the dark without looking back. Josiah stood alone, his men gone, his hands throbbing, his wife staring at him from the porch of another man's house, his daughter watching from the doorway with eyes that counted. Clara stepped forward. She came down the porch steps past Silas and stood on level ground 5 feet from the man she had married. She did not tremble. She did not flinch. The night was hot and still, and the moon gave enough light for them to see each other clearly, maybe for the first time. "It's over, Josiah," she said. "It ain't over. It'll never be over. You're my wife. That's my child. No judge, no giant, no damn notebook changes that." "The notebook changes everything, because it's not just my word anymore. It's dates and details and a daughter who can recite every single one of them. You can fight me. You can fight Silas. You can fight the judge. But you can't fight the truth written in a 7-year-old's memory." Josiah's face worked. Muscles pulled and released beneath the skin, emotions warring for control, rage, fear-wounded pride, the desperate calculations of a man watching his walls crack. "You'll regret this," he said. "Every day for the rest of your life you'll regret walking out that door." "I've regretted every day I didn't." The words hit Josiah harder than Silas's hands. He rocked back on his heels, his mouth opening and closing, and for one horrible naked second, Clara saw something she had never seen in her husband's face. Grief. Not for her. Not for Emmy. For himself. For the image he had built, the reputation he had polished, the version of Josiah Whitfield that Copper Bluff admired. That Josiah was dying right here in the dust, and the real one stood in its place, small, vicious, and utterly alone. "You'll come back," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. It was the voice of a man talking to himself. "You always come back." Not this time. Josiah stood there for a long moment, his fists clenching and unclenching, the fight draining out of him, the way blood drains from a wound, slowly, then all at once. He looked at Silas, who stood unmoved and unmoving, a wall that would not crack. He looked at Emmy, who stared back without blinking. He looked at Clara, who met his gaze as she had never met it before, steady and clear and done. He turned. He walked to his horse. He mounted. And he rode into the dark without another word. Tom Sutter lingered. He looked at Clara from atop his horse, his face crumpled with shame. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, I didn't know. I mean, I heard talk, but I didn't." He trailed off because there was no end to that sentence that didn't sound like an excuse. "You knew, Tom," Clara said quietly. "Everybody knew. You just didn't look." Sutter pulled his hat down over his eyes, clicked his tongue, and rode after Josiah into the night. The hoofbeats faded. The dust settled. The night sounds resumed: crickets, coyotes, the dry whisper of grass. Clara stood in the yard alone in the open, and her body began to shake. Not with fear. The fear was gone, spent, burned up in the furnace of the last 10 minutes. What shook her now was the aftermath, the adrenaline draining the muscles, unclenching the realization that she had looked her husband in the face and told him the truth, and the sky had not fallen. Silas stepped up beside her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, his big body radiating heat in the warm night, his presence as solid as the earth. "You did that," he said. "I did that." "How do you feel?" Clara looked at her hands. They were shaking so hard she couldn't hold them still. She pressed them together, fingers laced, and held on. "Terrified," she said. "And free. And I don't know which one is bigger." Emmy came down from the porch. She walked barefoot through the dust, the wooden cow in one hand, and she stopped in front of her mother and looked up. "Mama." "Yeah, baby." "He cried." Clara blinked. "What?" "When he was riding away. I watched. He put his head down and his shoulders shook, Like when you cry, but you don't want nobody to see. Clara didn't know what to do with that information. She stored it somewhere deep in the same place she stored all the complicated truths about Josiah, that he was cruel and broken, that he was vicious and pitiful, that he had hurt her in ways she would carry forever, and that somewhere under all of it, he was a man who had never learned how to be anything else. "Come inside, baby," Clara said. "It's late." Emmy took her hand. Then, without looking at Silas, the child reached out with her other hand and grabbed two of his fingers. She held them both, her mother and the giant, and walked them toward the door, a 7-year-old bridge between two people who did not yet know what they were to each other, but knew they were something. Inside, Silas built up the fire. Clara sat Emmy on the bed and tucked the blanket around her. The child was asleep in under a minute, the crash of adrenaline pulling her down into a sleep so deep her breathing barely moved the covers. Clara sat on the edge of the bed watching her daughter. Silas poured water and brought it to her. She drank. Her hands still shook. "He won't come back tonight," Silas said. "No, not tonight." "But he ain't done." "No, he ain't done. The court date is in 12 days. He'll use every one of them." "Let him." Clara set the cup down and looked at Silas. He was standing by the hearth, the fire behind him, his face half in light and half in shadow. She studied him the way she had studied the notebook, carefully looking for what was written between the lines. "Silas." "Yeah." "When Eleanor died, did you think you'd ever feel anything again?" He was quiet for so long that the fire popped twice and the wind shifted outside, and a coyote finished one song and started another before he answered. "No," he said. "I figured I was done with feeling. Figured the part of me that knew how to do that went with her. And now?" He looked at her. Not past her, not around her. At her, and she felt it. The weight of his attention, the full gravity of a man who had spent 3 years looking at nothing. Suddenly looking at something. "Now I reckon I was wrong." Clara's breath caught. Not the gasp of fear she had carried for 6 years, but something else. Something warmer. Something that bloomed in her chest, like the first flower after a drought, fragile and stubborn and determined to live. She stood. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat from his body, close enough to see the pulse in his throat. "I'm not ready," she said. "For whatever this is. I don't even know who I am yet without being afraid." "I know. But I need you to know that you're the first person in 6 years who looked at me and didn't see something broken." Silas's hand came up. Slowly. He touched her jaw, his thumb tracing the line where the worst bruise had been, the ghost of it still faintly visible. His hand could have wrapped around her whole face. Instead, it barely grazed her skin. "You ain't broken," he said. "You're the strongest thing in this county." Clara closed her eyes. One tear fell tracking down her cheek, running over his thumb. He did not wipe it away. He let it fall because it was hers, and he would not take even her grief from her without permission. She stepped back. He let her go. She returned to the bed, lay down beside Emmy, and pulled the child close. "Good night, Silas." "Good night, Clara." He returned to his chair by the door. He did not sleep. He watched the road through the window, one hand resting on his knee, the other on the arm of the chair. Outside, the night deepened toward its darkest hour, and the land stretched flat and silent in every direction, holding its secrets, the way all land does, patiently without judgment, waiting for whatever morning would bring. On the bedside table, Clara's notebook lay open to the last entry. She had written it that afternoon before any of this happened, in the quiet hour when Emmy napped and Silas worked the barn. The entry read, Day 8. No bruises. Emmy laughed today. Real laughter. I had forgotten the sound. Below it, in smaller letters, she had added, I think I am beginning to remember who I was before him. The fire burned low. The cabin held. The night passed. And 12 days ticked closer to the reckoning that would either set Clara Whitfield free or send her back to the life she had survived but never lived. 12 days passed like stones dropping into a well. Clara spent them preparing. Not hiding, not waiting, preparing. She sat at Silas's table every morning, with the notebook open, and a pencil in her good hand, rewriting entries that had smudged clarifying dates she had rushed, adding details that surfaced from memory like bodies rising from deep water. The entry about the ribs. The entry about the choking. The entry about the night Josiah dragged her across the bedroom floor by her ankle, and Emmy had stood in the hallway, counting to 37 before he stopped. She wrote it all. Every ugly, shameful, unbearable word. Emmy watched her mother write. She did not ask what the words said. She already knew. She had lived inside those words. But on the 9th day, she sat beside Clara and said, "Mama, you forgot April." Clara looked up. "Which April, baby?" "April last year, when he threw the plate, the blue one. It broke against the wall, and a piece hit my arm." Emmy pushed up her sleeve. A thin white scar 2 inches long ran along her forearm. "You said it was an accident, but you wrote it down. I saw you." Clara stared at the scar. She had forgotten. Not the event you don't forget a piece of crockery cutting your child, but the entry. She had written it at 3 in the morning, hands shaking, and the pencil had been dull, and the light had been bad. She turned pages, found it. April 19th. The entry was barely legible. "Can you read it to me, baby? My writing's bad." Emmy leaned over the notebook. She read her mother's handwriting with the fluency of someone who had studied it in secret, the way prisoners study the walls of their cells. "Plate thrown. Blue one. Broke on wall near E-piece, cut her arm. Jay said she shouldn't have been standing there. Bandaged with dish towel. Did not go to doctor." Clara's pencil moved. She rewrote the entry clear and firm. "Better?" Emmy asked. "Better." On the 11th day, Dottie Pierce arrived at the ranch in a hired buggy, her silver hair pinned tight, her jaw set like she was heading into battle. She brought with her Martha Gaines, the baker's wife, who sat in the buggy wringing her hands and looking like she might bolt at any second. Silas met them at the gate. "Dottie?" "Drummond, get out of my way, I need to see Clara." He stepped aside. Nobody argued with Dottie Pierce. The woman had buried 2 husbands and run the boarding house alone for 15 years, and once chased a drifter out of her kitchen with a cast-iron skillet. She did not ask permission to do things. She informed you that she was doing them. Clara met her at the door. Dottie looked her over the healing face, the splinted arm, the straight spine, and nodded once sharp the way a general inspects a soldier. "You look better than I expected." "Thank you, Dottie." "Don't thank me. I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here because Martha has something to tell you, and she's been trying to talk herself out of it for 3 days, and I'm tired of listening to her dither." Martha Gaines stepped forward. She was a round woman, soft-spoken, the kind who brought casseroles to funerals, and never said an unkind word about anyone. Her face was red, and her eyes were wet, and her hands would not stop moving. "Mrs. Whitfield, Martha swallowed. "I saw something, 2 years ago. The night of the harvest dance." Clara went still. "You and Josiah were behind the church. I had stepped out for air. I saw him. I saw him grab you by the throat and push you against the wall. Your feet came off the ground. I saw it. And Martha's voice broke. She pressed her hand over her mouth, and the tears came hot and fast. "I went back inside. I told myself I was mistaken. I told myself it was dark, and I couldn't be sure. But I was sure. I saw it clear as day, and I walked away, and I have not slept a full night since." Clara's face did not change. She had learned long ago not to react when people confessed what they had failed to do for her. If she reacted, she would scream, and if she screamed, she would never stop. "Will you tell the judge?" Clara asked. Martha looked at Dottie. Dottie's eyes were steel. "Yes," Martha said. "God help me, yes. I should have told someone 2 years ago. I should have told anyone. I didn't, and I have to live with that, but I can tell the judge now, and I will." Clara nodded. She reached out and took Martha's hand. The baker's wife flinched at the touch, then held on, gripping Clara's fingers the way a drowning person grips a rope. "Thank you," Clara said. "That took courage." "No. What you're doing takes courage. What I did was just guilt that finally got louder than my fear." Dottie watched this exchange with dry eyes and a tight mouth. When it was done, she turned to Silas, who had stayed by the gate. "Drummond, you got more chairs. We need to talk strategy, and I don't intend to stand." Silas found 2 more chairs. They sat on the porch, Dottie, Martha, Clara, Silas, and they talked. Dottie had been busy. She had spoken to 6 women in town. 3 had seen bruises on Clara over the years. 2 had heard Josiah's raised voice through the walls of the store when they'd come by after hours. 1, old Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to the Whitfields, had heard Clara crying through the shared wall so many times she had started sleeping in her back room to escape the sound. "Patterson won't testify," Dottie said. "She's 80 and scared of her own shadow. But the others might. I'm working on them." "How many do we need?" Clara asked. "1 would be enough. 2 is better. 3 and Josiah can't talk his way out of a paper bag. He'll retaliate against all of them. He'll try. But here's the thing about men like Josiah: their power comes from people being afraid to speak. Once one person speaks, the fear breaks. And once the fear breaks, it don't mend." Clara looked at the notebook in her lap. 12 days of rewriting, clarifying, remembering. 2 years of pain compressed into 87 pages. She closed it and held it against her chest. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Dottie confirmed. "Hargrove set the hearing for 10 o'clock. I suggest you be there at 9. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay beside Emmy, listening to her daughter's breathing, counting the way Emmy counted inhale, exhale, trying to find rhythm in the repetition. But her mind would not quiet. It ran through the hearing like a horse running through fire, panicked, circling, looking for a way through that didn't burn. She got up and went to the porch. Silas was there. Of course he was there. He was always there. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "My mind won't shut up." "What's it saying?" Clara sat on the step. She pulled her knees up and rested her chin on them, making herself small in a way she hadn't done since she was a girl. "It's saying I'm going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow and open my mouth and nothing will come out. It's saying Josiah will be sitting right there 10 feet away looking at me with those eyes, and I'll fold, the way I always fold." "You didn't fold the other night. He was 3 feet away, and you read him his own sins. That was different. That was dark. That was anger. Tomorrow is broad daylight with the whole town watching, and a judge waiting, and I have to be believable. I have to be calm. I can't cry because if I cry, they'll say I'm hysterical. I can't be angry because if I'm angry, they'll say I'm unhinged. I have to be the perfect victim, Silas, and there's no such thing." Silas leaned forward in his chair. "Can I tell you something? Please." The night Eleanor was dying. The fever was at its worst. She couldn't see me anymore, couldn't hear me, but I kept talking to her anyway. Telling her about the ranch, about the horses, about the weather. Stupid things. Things that didn't matter. Why? Because I thought if I stopped talking, she'd stop breathing, like my voice was the only thing keeping her here. He paused. She died anyway, right in the middle of me telling her about a calf that got stuck in the fence that morning. I was mid-sentence, and she was gone. Clara's throat tightened. I spent 3 years thinking I failed because I couldn't keep talking fast enough. Couldn't find the right words. Couldn't say the thing that would have made her stay. Silas looked at Clara, and his eyes held the quiet devastation of a man who had carried a weight so long it had shaped his spine. But here's what I learned. It was never about the words. It was about being there, standing in the room, refusing to leave. I don't understand. Tomorrow, you don't need perfect words. You don't need to be calm or composed or believable. You just need to be there. Stand in that room, open that notebook, and refuse to leave. That's all. That's everything. Clara stared at him. She felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking opening. The way a seed cracks when it starts to grow. Painful and necessary and irreversible. Will you be there? She asked. Where else would I be? She smiled. It was small and crooked, and it trembled at the edges, but it was real, and it was the first smile she had given any man in 6 years that was not born from fear or performance. Good night, Silas. Good night, Clara. She went inside. She lay down. She slept. Morning came like a held breath, finally released. Clara dressed before Emmy woke. She chose the dress she had arrived in, the one with the tear at the hem, the blood stain on the collar that would not wash out. Dottie had offered her something nicer. Clara refused. She wanted the judge to see what she had worn the day her daughter ran 8 miles barefoot. Emmy woke and saw her mother dressed and standing by the door, and the child did not need to be told. She climbed out of bed, put on her shoes, and took her mother's hand. How many days, Mama? Clara counted. 19. That's the most ever. Yes, baby, it is. Silas drove them to town. The ride was quiet. Emmy sat between them, her wooden cow in her pocket, her face turned toward the road. Clara held the notebook. Silas held the reins. Nobody spoke because everything that needed saying had been said on the porch the night before, and what remained now was not words, but action. The courthouse was full. Clara had expected a few people. Dottie, Martha, maybe the judge's clerk. Instead, she walked through the door and found every chair taken and people standing along the walls. Women she recognized from church. Men from the feed store. Old Mrs. Patterson, who Dottie had said wouldn't come, sitting in the back row, clutching her shawl with both hands. The baker. The blacksmith. The schoolteacher. Half of Copper Bluff crammed into a room built for 20, sweating in the July heat. And in the front row, Josiah Whitfield. Clean shirt, combed hair, polished boots. His face arranged in the expression of a wronged husband, dignified suffering, quiet strength. He had a lawyer beside him, a man Clara didn't recognize, thin and sharp-featured, imported from the city. Josiah's eyes found Clara the moment she entered. She felt them like a physical force, a hand around her throat from across the room. Her step faltered. Emmy's grip tightened on her fingers. Silas stood behind her. Not beside her. Behind. His shadow fell across her back, and she felt it, the way you feel the sun, constant, warm, impossible to ignore. She walked to the front. She sat down. Emmy sat beside her. Silas took a seat in the second row directly behind Clara, close enough that she could feel him breathing. Judge Hargrove entered. The room stood. He sat. They sat. This hearing is in the matter of Whitfield versus Whitfield, Hargrove said. Petition for the return of wife and child. Mrs. Whitfield has filed a counter-petition citing endangerment. We'll hear both sides. He looked at Josiah's lawyer. Mr. Crane, you may begin. Crane stood. He was good, Clara could tell immediately. His voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of a man presenting common sense, rather than argument. He spoke of Josiah's standing in the community, his business, his contributions to the church. He spoke of Clara's fragile mental state, her erratic behavior, her abandonment of the marital home. He spoke of the impropriety of a married woman residing with a bachelor. He never raised his voice. He never sneered. He painted a picture of a concerned husband and a confused wife, and he did it so smoothly that Clara could feel the room shifting, heads nodding, the familiar comfort of believing the man in the clean shirt. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood. Her legs shook. She could feel every eye in the room, every judgment, every whisper waiting to be born. Josiah's gaze pressed against her like a hand on her chest. She opened the notebook. June 7th, 1876, she read. Her voice cracked on the first word. She swallowed. She started again. June 7th, 1876. 2 ribs broken left side, 3rd time. Josiah came home from the store. Supper was on the table, but the bread was cold. He hit me 4 times in the kitchen. I fell on the 5th. He kicked me twice on the floor. Emmy was standing in the hallway. She counted 9 blows total. She was 5 years old. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of attention. The airless silence of a room where something has broken. Clara turned the page. August 12th, 1876. Black eye right side, split lip. Josiah said I embarrassed him at church by speaking too long with Reverend Halstead. He waited until Emmy was in bed. He hit me in the bedroom. I slept on the kitchen floor because I couldn't climb back onto the bed. She turned another page, and another, and another. She read for 12 minutes. Every entry, every date, every bruise, every fracture, every night spent on the floor, every morning spent hiding the evidence. Her voice cracked and wavered and sometimes dropped to a whisper, but it never stopped. She read the way Silas had told her to, not perfectly, not calmly, but present. Standing in the room, refusing to leave. The room changed. She could feel it changing the way you feel weather shifting. The nodding heads went still. The comfortable expressions crumbled. Mrs. Patterson in the back row had tears running down her face. Martha Gaines gripped the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. Even men who had drunk with Josiah, who had laughed at his jokes, who had shaken his hand after church, even they sat with their jaws tight and their eyes down. Josiah's face was a mask, but Clara knew his masks. She had memorized every one. And beneath this one, she could see the machinery, failing the gears, grinding the smooth operator of Copper Bluff, disintegrating entry by entry under the weight of his own cruelty made audible. His lawyer, Crane, objected twice. Hargrove overruled him both times without looking up. Clara reached the last entry. She read it slowly. July 9th, 1877. Josiah broke my left arm. He twisted it behind my back until it snapped. Emmy ran. She ran 8 miles barefoot to a stranger's ranch. She was 7 years old. She asked a man she had never met to save her mother because there was no one else left to ask. Clara closed the notebook. She looked at the judge. "That's all, Your Honor." Hargrove removed his spectacles. He cleaned them. He put them back on. His hands were steady, but his voice, when it came, carried a roughness it had not carried before. "Is the child present?" "She is." "Emmy," Hargrove said, "would you come up here, please?" Emmy slid off her chair. She walked to the front of the room, past her father, who sat rigid as a post, past the lawyer, who would not meet her eyes, past the rows of townspeople who watched a 7-year-old walk with the gravity of someone 10 times her age. She stood before the judge. She was so small, she barely cleared the desk. "Emmy," Hargrove said gently, "your mama read from her book. Do you remember the things she wrote about?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell me in your own words what you remember?" Emmy looked at her mother. Clara nodded. Emmy looked at the judge. "I remember all of it," she said. "I count things. I count because when he's hitting Mama, counting is the only thing I can do. I can't stop him. I'm too small. But I can count. And I remember every number." "Can you give me an example?" "November 3rd last year, he hit Mama 11 times. I was behind the door. I counted on my fingers, and when I ran out of fingers, I started over. 11. Then he stopped and went to bed, and I came out, and Mama was on the floor, and I brought her a wet cloth, and she said, 'Thank you, baby.' And I said 11, and she wrote it down." The courtroom made a sound. Not a gasp, not a murmur. A sound deeper than that. The collective exhale of a community that had just been forced to look at the thing they had spent years looking away from. Josiah's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the child is 7. Her testimony." "Sit down, Mr. Crane." Crane sat. Hargrove looked at Josiah. "Mr. Whitfield, do you wish to respond?" Josiah stood. He smoothed his shirt. He found his smile dimmer now, damaged, but still functional. Your Honor, I love my wife. I love my daughter. Whatever mistakes I've made... Mistakes! The word came from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Old Mrs. Patterson was standing, her frail body shaking, her shawl clutched in her hands. I heard that child scream through my wall for 4 years, Josiah Whitfield. 4 years. And every Sunday I watched you shake the Reverend's hand, and I said nothing because I was afraid. Mistakes. Lord have mercy. She sat down. The room hummed. Another voice. Martha Gaines. I saw him choke her behind the church 2 years ago. Harvest dance. Her feet were off the ground. Another. A woman Clara barely knew. She came into my shop with a black eye in March. She said she fell. I knew she didn't fall. I gave her extra fabric for her trouble, and I never said a word to anyone. Another. And another. The testimonies came not like a flood, but like a dam breaking one crack at a time. Each voice small, each confession heavy with shame and guilt, and the terrible knowledge that silence had been complicity and looking away had been permission. Josiah's smile died. It did not fade. It died. His face went blank, then gray, then old. He aged 10 years in 2 minutes, shrinking in his chair, as the town he had charmed and manipulated and controlled for a decade turned its eyes upon him, and finally saw what had been there all along. Crane leaned over and whispered in Josiah's ear. Josiah shook his head. Crane whispered again more urgently. Josiah shoved him away. This is a conspiracy, Josiah said, standing. His voice was raw, stripped of performance. She turned them all against me. That giant put them up to it. This whole thing is a... Mr. Whitfield. Hargrove's voice cut like a blade. Sit down. Josiah did not sit down. He pointed at Clara. She's a liar. She's always been a liar. That book is fabricated. The child is coached. You can't... I said sit down. Josiah's mouth worked. His hand trembled at his side. The room watched a man come apart in real time, the public face peeling away like paint in heat, revealing the raw, ugly wood beneath. He sat. He did not speak again. Hargrove wrote for a long time. The scratch of his pen was the only sound. When he finished, he looked up. It is the finding of this court that Clara Whitfield and her daughter Emmy Whitfield shall remain under the protection of this court's order. The petition for return is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of criminal assault. Mr. Whitfield, you are ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 1 mile from your wife and child until further notice. Violation will result in arrest. He set down his pen. Mrs. Whitfield, you are free to go. Clara did not move. She sat in her chair, the notebook in her lap, her daughter beside her, and she did not move because her body had spent 6 years bracing for impact, and it did not know how to stop. Emmy took her hand. Mama, it's over. Clara looked down at her daughter. Those counting eyes. Those old eyes that had seen too much and carried too much and somehow against every odd had stayed clear. Yeah, baby, Clara whispered. It's over. She stood. The room parted for her. Women she had known for years reached out to touch her arm as she passed, their faces wet, their whispers rushed. I'm sorry. I should have... Forgive me. Clara nodded to each one. She did not forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she acknowledged them because acknowledgement was the first step on a road that forgiveness might one day travel. Silas waited outside. He stood by the wagon, hat in hand, his face unreadable. Clara walked down the steps with Emmy at her side and stopped in front of him. The judge ruled in my favor, she said. I heard. Josiah can't come near us. I heard that too. So I don't need your protection anymore. Silas looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not pain, not loss, but the quiet rearrangement of a man preparing to let go of the only thing that had made him feel alive in 3 years. No, ma'am, he said. I reckon you don't. Clara held his gaze. "I don't need your protection, but I could use a friend." The word hung between them, insufficient and enormous. "A friend," Silas repeated. "For now." He looked at her. She looked at him. Emmy looked at both of them with the exasperated expression of a child who understood things that adults made complicated. "She means she wants to stay Mr. Drummond," Emmy said. Clara's face flushed. "Emmy." "Well, you do." Silas looked down at the child, then at Clara, and for the second time in 3 years, his face did the thing it had forgotten how to do. Not the almost smile of a man remembering, a real one. Small, crooked, unpracticed, like a muscle that had atrophied being asked to work again. "There's room," he said. Clara smiled back. Hers was small too, and crooked and real. "Then take us home." He helped them into the wagon. Emmy sat between them as always. Clara held the notebook in her lap. Silas took the reins. They drove out of Copper Bluff under the full weight of the July sun. Behind them, the town watched. Some with shame, some with relief, some with the slow, painful awakening of people who had been comfortable in their blindness and could no longer pretend to be blind. Emmy counted fence posts on the way home. She counted 14 before she stopped and looked up at Silas. "Mr. Drummond?" "Emmy." "I'm not going to count any more." Silas glanced down at her. "No. No. Counting was for bad days. I don't think I need it now." Clara's hand found her daughter's knee. Silas's hand found the other. Emmy sat between them, held by both, and she let her eyes close and her head lean against her mother's arm, and she did not count. She just breathed. At the ranch, Silas pulled the wagon up and set the brake. He climbed down and reached up for Emmy, who jumped into his arms without hesitation, the way children jump when they know with absolute certainty they will be caught. He set her down. She ran toward the porch, then stopped. She turned back. "Mr. Drummond?" "Yeah." "My cow needs a friend." "Can you make another one?" "What kind?" "A horse. A big one." He nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Emmy grinned the full, uncomplicated grin of a child who has been given permission to be a child again and disappeared into the cabin. Clara climbed down from the wagon. She stood beside Silas, both of them facing the cabin, the porch, the door that stood open, the sound of a child's footsteps inside. "Silas." "Yeah." "That window, the one you touch every time you walk past." He went still. "Eleanor's window?" Clara said softly. "The one where she kept flowers." "How did you know that—" "Emmy told me. She noticed. She notices everything." Clara paused. "Would it be all right if I planted something there?" Silas did not answer for a long time. He stood with his hands at his sides, a big man carved from grief and silence, and he looked at the empty window ledge where his dead wife's flowers had once lived. 3 years of nothing growing there. 3 years of touching the bare wood and walking past. "Yeah," he said at last. His voice was rough, the single syllable dragged up from somewhere deep. "I think she'd like that." Clara touched his arm. He covered her hand with his. They stood like that for one long breath, two people who had been broken by different storms, finding shelter in the same place. Then Clara walked inside, and Silas followed, and the cabin door closed behind them. Not against the world. Just closed. The way a home closes at the end of a day, holding what matters inside, letting the rest wait. On the porch, the chair where Silas had kept watch for 12 nights, sat empty now. He would not need it tonight. Inside, Emmy's laughter rose bright and startling and free, and it filled the rooms that had been silent for 3 years, and it reached the rafters, and it reached the walls, and it reached the man standing by the window, touching the ledge one last time, before he turned toward the sound of living. The notebook lay on the kitchen table closed, its last entry already written, its purpose already served. Clara would keep it forever, not as a wound, but as proof that she had survived. Proof that her daughter had counted, proof that one night a barefoot girl ran through the dark and knocked on a giant's door, and everything changed. Outside, the sun burned high over Copper Bluff, Texas, and the drought held, and the dust rose, and the land stretched flat and endless in every direction. But inside that cabin, something grew. Not fast, not easy, but steady, the way all real things grow, rooted in pain, reaching toward light, stubborn enough to bloom in the hardest ground. And Emmy Whitfield, 7 years old, did not count a single thing for the rest of that day. She didn't need to. She was home.